My wife won a $9 million jackpot, filed for divorce, and kicked me out, but she forgot about the prenup her parents forced me to sign before our marriage. I, 35 am, come from a simple background. My parents live in a quiet suburb, and I grew up in a small 3-bedroom house that always smelled like fresh laundry and home-cooked meals. After high school, I took a series of odd jobs, bartending, helping at my uncle's hardware store, eventually managing a local sporting goods shop. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. My wife, on the other hand, came from a world I'd never experienced. Her parents owned multiple properties, drove fancy cars, and hosted large, ostentatious parties a few times a year. Let's call them my father-in-law, Phil, and mother-in-law, Mael. My Phil was a tall, imposing figure, socially and physically, exuding a quiet dominance in any room. He'd make casual remarks that were more like veiled threats or manipulations. My Mael was similarly skilled at subtle disapproval. Just one raised eyebrow could make people shrink. They were never overtly cruel in front of me, but I felt their disapproval lurking beneath polite conversation. After my wife and I got engaged, I realized how much her parents feared outsiders, nabbing their family assets. They looked at me like an intruder, despite the fact that my wife and I had been dating for years. Before we could set a wedding date, my FIL demanded I sign a prenuptial agreement. I didn't have the finances to fight it legally, and I was too blinded by love. I kept telling myself it was just a symbolic thing to appease her parents. Love was all the guarantee I needed, right? The day I signed remains vivid in my mind. It was a warm afternoon at her parents' massive home. My FIL laid out the document, slid a pen my way. My Mael offered me coffee, almost like it was a normal business transaction. My wife stood off to the side, saying little. That hurt, but I shrugged it off, figuring it wouldn't matter in the long run. The contract basically said that any gifts, inheritances, or trust funds belonging to her family remained her separate property, while any major asset we acquired jointly, like a house or lottery winnings, would be marital property. I found that odd, but I just wanted to marry her. 6 months later, we married by a lake in a picturesque ceremony. My parents were overwhelmed by the extravagance, but supportive. I recall tension on my father's face when he greeted my in-laws. He'd always told me to trust my gut, but I thought love would conquer all doubts. The first couple of years went by without major incident. We lived in a condo her parents helped us secure. I paid monthly toward the mortgage, though the down payment had come from her father's gift. Looking back, it was never truly a gift, more like a tool for controlling us. But back then, I assumed this was just how wealthy families operated. Our marriage had the usual money squabbles and occasional blowouts about our parents intruding on our decisions. They'd show up unannounced, bring new furniture or decor, and occasionally reorder our entire living space without warning. My wife would brush off my frustration, labeling it her parents' helpful nature. Then came the day that turned everything upside down. My wife called me, breathless with excitement, saying she'd won a $9 million lottery jackpot from a random ticket she bought at a gas station. At first, I was elated, dreaming of quitting our jobs, traveling the world. But the joy dimmed quickly. She insisted we keep it secret, even from my parents. She became oddly paranoid, talking about claiming the money properly and meeting with lawyers I'd never met. When I asked to join these meetings, she said, "You'd feel out of place," which stung. I had no clue the real bombshell was yet to come. One afternoon, I came home from work, exhausted, to find her there with her aunt rummaging through drawers. She dropped the news as if it was casual. She was filing for divorce. She told me to pack my bags and leave the condo, an arrangement she claimed was under her name. I was floored. Sure, I'd contributed monthly mortgage payments, but apparently she believed her father's initial down payment and her new fortune made me irrelevant. I felt my heart splinter. I called my father, voice shaking, telling him I'd just been kicked out of my own home. It was the ultimate betrayal. But the biggest shock came next. I discovered that my father-in-law had sent his personal attorney to shield her. They wanted me out so they could isolate the lottery winnings from me. Except they'd forgotten the terms of the very prenup they forced on me. Instead of shielding their daughter entirely, it said that any windfall acquired during marriage counted as a joint asset. Suddenly, I realized that if they insisted on divorcing me right after that jackpot, they might not get to keep it all. I decided to handle things carefully. My father urged me to stay calm, get a lawyer outside their social circle, and brace for a nasty fight. And I was determined not to fold. They'd thrown down the gauntlet, pushing me around like an expendable nuisance. If they thought I'd quietly walk away, they had severely underestimated me. I spent a few nights at my parents' place, trying to absorb the shock. My mother was livid, ranting that my in-laws were disrespectful from day one. My father, while equally angry, stayed pragmatic. He contacted an old friend, a family law attorney, and got me an appointment first thing in the morning. Sitting in that attorney's office, I felt a swirl of anger and relief. I told him how the in-laws insisted on the prenup, how my wife just won $9 million, and then blindsided me with divorce. When he looked over the prenup, he actually chuckled. They shot themselves in the foot, he said. They specifically included language that lumps lottery winnings under marital assets. Unless a judge does some wild legal interpretation, you're entitled to a substantial portion. Hearing this was like a lifeline. I've been so worried the prenup would lock me out, but it turned out their fear of me claiming inherited wealth had overshadowed the possibility of a lottery scenario. My lawyer warned it wouldn't be easy. My in-laws were wealthy, well-connected, and likely to deploy an entire legal team. But he believed we had a strong case, especially since I contributed financially to the marriage and been abruptly expelled from our jointly occupied home. I asked about the divorce process. In our state, a contested divorce could easily stretch for months or longer. But if my wife's side realized they were on shaky ground, they might seek a fast settlement. The lawyer predicted they'd try intimidation or underhanded tactics to get me to sign away my rights cheaply. Sure enough, my father-in-law left me a menacing voicemail within days, telling me to back off because I didn't deserve anything from his daughter. He claimed if I tried to pursue the lottery winnings, he'd ensure I ended up with nothing. My lawyer just advised me to document it all. Then my mother-in-law cornered me outside my parent home, offering a pittance if I'd vanish quietly. She presented it as a generous deal, which was so low it wouldn't even cover half the mortgage contributions I'd made. I refused, saying we'd see each other in court. She scoffed, baffled by my defiance, clearly unaccustomed to anyone rejecting her money. With negotiations at a standstill, my lawyer filed motions to secure the lottery funds from being hidden or transferred. That enraged my in-laws, who started spinning tales about me being a gold digger who preyed on their innocent daughter. It stung, but I stood firm. My boss, who owned a sporting goods shop, had my back, brushing off my father-in-law's attempts to meddle in my employment. Friends took sides, some calling me petty, others applauding me for fighting back. The tension was suffocating, but I refused to cave. After a couple of weeks of fruitless negotiation, we got a court date. My wife was nowhere to be found personally. She was practically under her parents' protective wing, ignoring all direct communication with me. She had her lawyers do the talking, claiming I was the leech who'd contributed nothing to the marriage. My lawyer pushed back with financial records, timeshare of bills, and the explicit prenup clause about windfalls. We also highlighted how I'd been violently shut out of the condo. The judge ordered both sides to prepare for a more formal hearing on asset division. In one last attempt at intimidation, my father-in-law threatened my boss again, who promptly told him to get lost. That only fueled my father-in-law's anger. My lawyer said we needed to proceed carefully, but that he was confident a judge would see through their scare tactics. Nothing could have prepared me for the final showdown in court, but at least I knew the law was, ironically, on my side, thanks to the very prenup they'd forced on me. Weeks passed, and the tension around the upcoming hearing reached a fever pitch. My wife still avoided direct contact with me, yet her lawyers bombarded mine with motions. They insisted the lottery win was separate property because she purchased the ticket, ignoring the prenup language that any major windfall during marriage was marital. Meanwhile, my father-in-law tried to smear my reputation among friends and business contacts, peddling the narrative that I was a gold digger who'd married into the family solely for money. During this period, I felt a swirl of frustration and motivation. If they believed they could bully me out of my rights, they were mistaken. I had documents showing how I contributed to our shared life, utility bills, groceries, partial mortgage payments. My attorney and I pored over every detail of the prenup. He pointed out a critical sentence specifying all financial windfalls, including but not limited to lottery or game show winnings, shall be considered marital assets unless expressly designated otherwise. It was like my in-laws had left a back door open without realizing it. A week before the hearing, we had a preliminary status conference. My wife arrived with her parents and a posse of lawyers, 4 attorneys, plus a financial advisor. They looked at me with that same air of superiority, but their expressions faltered when my lawyer calmly produced the prenup text, highlighting the exact clause about lottery proceeds. The judge listened quietly, seemed unimpressed by their attempts to dismiss it, and ordered that all substantial assets remain frozen until the main hearing. That same afternoon, my mother-in-law cornered me outside the courthouse, insisting we should talk like adults. She tried offering a lump sum even lower than before, labeling it generous for someone of my background. I refused again, telling her we'd let the judge decide. She snapped that I was destroying the family, as if I were the one who blindsided her daughter with a divorce. The hypocrisy made my blood boil, but I kept my cool. My lawyer had warned me not to engage in heated exchanges that could be twisted against me later. Behind the scenes, I was worried my in-laws might try to stash the lottery winnings in secret accounts. My lawyer, anticipating that possibility, requested court orders preventing any large transfers. We also arranged to have a forensic accountant ready if we suspected them of hiding funds. My father-in-law's anger flared. He left me a voicemail calling me vile, accusing me of draining the love out of his daughter's life. It was rich, considering they were the ones who threw me out right after hitting the jackpot. As the hearing approached, I prepared meticulously with my attorney. We rehearsed my statement, ensuring I'd appear calm and factual in court. I had copies of the prenup, receipts for the mortgage I'd partially funded, and even text showing my wife acknowledging our joint bills. The lawyer recommended I keep my answers concise, let the evidence speak. If they tried emotional theatrics, we'd counter with clear documentation. On the morning of the hearing, I stood in front of the courthouse, heart pounding. My parents accompanied me for moral support, though they waited outside the courtroom once proceedings began. Stepping in, I saw my wife seated beside her father, both wearing stone-cold expressions. Her mother lingered at the back, arms folded. My father-in-law's lawyers, with their polished suits, looked confident, perhaps believing money and legal muscle could outmatch the facts. The judge, a stern woman in her 50s, wasted no time. She invited each side to present arguments. My wife's lead attorney tried framing me as a minor contributor who'd done little more than occupy the same living space. They argued the lottery purchase was her personal transaction, done with her money. But my lawyer calmly pointed out how the prenup explicitly lumps such windfalls into marital property, and we also had bank records showing she'd used our joint account card that day. When we introduced that evidence, I saw visible tension ripple through my father-in-law's camp. The judge asked if they had any contrary documentation proving it was her personal funds. They fumbled, claiming the card was accidentally used or that it was her father's deposit in the account. But the statements clearly labeled our names, not hers alone. The judge took note, her gaze shifting to them expectantly. Finally, my wife spoke. She claimed she never wanted to hurt me, that her parents pushed for divorce once the jackpot arrived to protect family assets. She stumbled over her words, admitting she felt pressured, but also tried to justify it as everyone would come after us if they knew about the money. My lawyer asked if she consulted me before making these decisions. She admitted no. The judge's disapproval became palpable. By midday, it was clear the prenuptial agreement was a double-edged sword for them. The very document they'd enforced to isolate their wealth now threatened to place a massive chunk of lottery winnings in my hands. The judge scheduled a subsequent hearing for final decisions, stating she was inclined to treat the lottery as a major marital asset subject to equitable distribution. Outside, my father-in-law walked past me, muttering, "This is far from over." But his confidence was definitely cracked. In the weeks leading up to the final ruling, their desperation escalated. My father-in-law's lawyers tried everything, filing motions to reconsider the prenup's wording, claiming intent hadn't been to include lottery proceeds. The judge denied these motions, pointing to the plain language. My mother-in-law tried cornering me again, warning me I'd regret it if I broke their family. I told her point blank that they'd started this by kicking me out and blindsiding me with divorce. My wife tried reaching out, leaving emotional voicemails saying she didn't want things to end so bitterly, that if we just come to a private arrangement, we could still salvage some relationship. I'd have considered it if they'd treated me fairly from the start. But after the intimidation, the lies, and the forced eviction, my trust was gone. My lawyer advised me not to engage in these back-channel talks. We had a strong legal position, no reason to settle for crumbs. Finally, the day of the final hearing arrived. The courtroom was packed with attorneys for both sides. My father, mother, and a few friends came to support me, seated quietly in the back. The judge took the bench, reviewed the updated filings, and allowed final statements. My father-in-law's lead lawyer tried one last gamble, painting me as some cunning opportunist who only discovered the prenup's loophole after benefiting from the family's generosity. My lawyer countered with the straightforward facts. 1. They forced me to sign the prenup. 2. It explicitly included lottery or any windfall as shared property. And 3. My father-in-law financed part of our condo, yet I contributed monthly, so it wasn't a purely separate asset either. Moreover, the swift divorce filing right after the jackpot was textbook evidence of their plan to isolate me from the winnings. The judge listened patiently, then delivered her ruling. She declared the lottery winnings clearly fell under marital assets per the prenup's language. She criticized my in-laws for trying to twist the agreement they themselves had drafted. She also found that my wife's immediate eviction of me from the condo was unreasonable, and that I was entitled to reimbursement for my portion of the mortgage and other marital contributions. In short, O1, the judge set forth an order. I'd receive a substantial percentage of the lottery payout, plus reimbursement for my share in the condo. We parted ways with a finalization date set a few weeks later, just to process paperwork. My father-in-law's face was thunderous. My mother-in-law looked outraged, whispering furiously to him. My wife stood there, tears in her eyes, maybe from genuine regret, or maybe from anger at losing so much money. I felt a swirl of vindication and sadness. We once loved each other. But greed, parental influence, and their attempts to exploit me shattered everything. In the aftermath, their lawyers tried to propose a slightly modified settlement, likely hoping I'd accept a smaller sum to avoid further drama. My lawyer recommended we finalize the judge's ruling as is. We had no incentive to reduce it. The only concession I made was giving up all interest in the condo. I never wanted to set foot in that place again. They cut me a check for an impressive sum. Was it half the jackpot? Not exactly, but it was big enough to let me rebuild my life comfortably. Throughout it all, I realized that my in-laws, in their arrogance, believed wealth insulated them from consequences. They didn't expect me to fight back effectively. The prenuptial agreement they insisted on ironically became the very instrument that secured my share of the winnings, poetic justice, if ever there was. My wife, as far as I know, remains under her parents' wing. She's lost face in her social circle for the fiasco that erupted. Some mutual acquaintances told me she's struggling with guilt, but I doubt she'll ever openly admit her family's role in orchestrating this. I used part of the settlement to help my parents upgrade their home as gratitude for standing by me. Another portion I invested. And though the entire ordeal left me scarred, changing how I view trust, marriage, and money, I take comfort in knowing I stood my ground. I refused to be bullied into accepting table scraps. While it was excruciatingly painful, the final outcome felt like a triumph over tyranny. Now, free from my in-laws' manipulative grasp, I'm moving forward. I've returned to a simpler life, ironically reminiscent of my pre-marriage days. But I'm stronger, wiser, and not at all the naive man they assumed they could steamroll. If they recall anything about me, let it be that they inadvertently gave me the legal weapon to ensure I wasn't left penniless. They started the war. I finished it. And that's the end of this chapter.